In the late 1990s, fashion was entering one of its most controversial eras. The heroin chic look was everywhere. Wayfish silhouettes, hollow cheeks, eyes that seemed to carry the weight of sleepless nights. Magazines couldn't get enough of it, and neither could the photographers who fueled the aesthetic. Out of the storm emerged a face that critics hailed as the next Kate Moss. Her name was Jaime King. With her icy beauty and distant gaze, she became the perfect canvas for the decade's most provocative visionaries. She wasn't just in the magazines, she was the look of an era. But in fashion, glory can be fleeting, and sometimes downfall arrives not from your own choices, but from the choices of others. When a tragic death struck close to Jaime, the industry seized on it. Suddenly, she wasn't the promising young star anymore. She became the face of a scandal she never caused. The label stuck, and just as quickly as she had risen, she vanished. Tonight, we uncover the hidden fall of Jaime King, how one woman's destiny was rewritten not by her own mistakes, but by a tragedy she could never control.
Before she was Jaime King, the face of a dangerous trend, she was James King, a teenage girl from Omaha, Nebraska, with a different kind of dream. Born in 1979, Jaime was raised far from the glamour of New York or the fashion capitals of Europe. Her upbringing was unassuming, middle American, the kind that didn't prepare you for runways or flashing cameras. But by the age of 14, everything changed. Discovered in her hometown by a modeling scout, Jaime was whisked into a world where adolescence disappeared the moment the lens focused. In a bold move to stand out in a sea of aspiring models, she began using her childhood nickname, James, a striking androgynous twist that caught the attention of casting directors and photographers alike. At just 15, she relocated to New York City alone to chase the kind of fame most girls only dreamed about. She didn't have to wait long. Within months, she was appearing in major spreads for Mademoiselle, Glamour, and Vogue. Her look wasn't just in demand, it was defining a moment. With her impossibly pale skin, sleepy blue eyes, and aloof expressions, Jaime was a mirror to the zeitgeist. Distant, disaffected, and intoxicatingly cool. But behind the dreamy editorials and jet-setting lifestyle was a teenager navigating an adult world without a map. The modeling industry didn't just embrace youth, it consumed it. Jaime's rise was swift, but the world she stepped into was far from innocent. She became part of a group of models and artists shaping the downtown New York scene, where high fashion bled into subculture and glamour danced closely to addiction. It was here that she met Davide Sorrenti, a rising star photographer with a tragic legacy ahead of him. Their relationship would mark a turning point, not only in Jaime's personal life, but in how the world would come to see her.
By the mid to late 1990s, Jaime King was not just part of the fashion conversation, she was the conversation. The name James King was everywhere. She had become one of the definitive faces of the heroin chic movement, often mentioned in the same breath as Kate Moss, with whom she shared not only aesthetic similarities, but also a haunting fragility that the fashion world seemed addicted to. Jaime's ascent wasn't just about her look, it was about what she represented. To the fashion elite, she was a paradox, young but worldly, angelic but decadent, detached but intensely present through the camera's eye. She embodied a certain kind of tragic glamour that was irresistible to the era's top photographers. David LaChapelle captured her in neon dreamscapes and gritty decadence. Ellen Mon Unworth painted her in vintage seduction. Each frame told a story, and often it was Jaime playing the lead in someone else's fantasy. She walked for Chanel, Dior, and Alexander McQueen. Her face adorned the covers of Vogue, Allure, Harper's Bazaar. She was the kind of muse stylists fought over, and the kind of star designers built entire campaigns around. But beneath the editorial spreads and flashing cameras was a young woman still piecing together who she was and who the world expected her to be. It was also during this time that she grew close to Davide Sorrenti, a prodigious young photographer whose style and energy matched the rawness of the era. He wasn't just another creative in her orbit, he was her boyfriend, her collaborator, and in many ways, her emotional anchor. Their relationship was intense, chaotic, artistic, and incredibly young. But in that youth, there was danger. David was deeply embedded in the New York fashion underground, where the lines between beauty, art, and excess blurred easily. Like many of their peers, they were surrounded by a culture that romanticized darkness. The heroin chic look wasn't just about makeup and lighting, it was often a mirror to real pain, real escapism. Jaime, for all her beauty and presence, was still just a teenager. And in a world that offered so much and demanded even more, the cost of fame was starting to show, just not in the way people would expect. In February 1997, everything came crashing down. Davide Sorrenti, Jaime's boyfriend, was found dead in his Manhattan apartment. The cause? A heroin overdose. He was just 20 years old. The fashion industry paused momentarily. Davide's death was a shock to many, but in the world they all existed in, tragedy had long been aestheticized. The heroin chic look, once edgy and aspirational, was now suddenly being examined under a different lens, that of a young man who had become its most haunting victim. And Jaime? She was at the center of it. Almost overnight, the narrative turned cruel. The media, hungry for a face to blame, a symbol to dissect, chose her. She had been Davide's muse, his lover, his frequent subject. Photos of her began circulating not just as fashion editorials, but as proof of a deeper rot, as if her very image had predicted the tragedy. Headlines didn't accuse her directly, but the implication was always there. The girl who had once represented ethereal coolness was now the face of something darker. And the truth? Jaime had never been charged, never implicated in any wrongdoing. She wasn't an addict. She wasn't at the scene of his death. But none of that mattered. She became the girlfriend, the heroin chic poster girl, a walking reminder of an era the industry now wanted to disown. Fashion, so quick to devour its darlings, needed to cleanse itself, and Jaime was sacrificed to the altar of public guilt. Brand deals dissolved. Magazine covers stopped calling. Designers who had once called her their muse no longer returned her calls. She was still the same girl, but the world had changed. Her image, once profitable, had become a liability. Worse still, she was barely 18. What no one seemed to acknowledge was that Jaime herself had lost someone she loved. Davide's death didn't just derail her career, it shattered something inside her. But there was no space for mourning when you were being labeled a cautionary tale. She quietly stepped away from modeling. No grand farewell, no official statement, just absence. One day she was on every magazine shelf in America. The next, she was gone. After disappearing from the pages of fashion's most elite magazines, Jaime King did something that most in her position never get to do. She started over. It wasn't easy. She was still young, still grieving, still carrying the weight of a label she never asked for.
But away from the glare of fashion's unforgiving spotlight, Jaime found something she had never really been allowed to have in her modeling career: a voice. She reemerged not as a model, but as an actress. In the early 2000s, Jaime began making quiet moves in Hollywood. Her early roles were small but promising: a nurse in Pearl Harbor, a supporting role in Blow, a memorable appearance in Bulletproof Monk. She was no longer just a face. She was a performer, learning to tell stories rather than be the silent centerpiece of someone else's vision. Then came Sin City in 2005, a film that would become her most iconic role and the closest thing to a full-circle moment. Shot in stylized black and white, the movie echoed the aesthetic that had once defined her modeling career. But this time, she wasn't being used to sell a narrative. She was the narrative. She played twins, Goldie and Wendy, two women entangled in tragedy, beauty, and strength. And in that duality, Jaime reclaimed something that had been taken from her: complexity. Her transformation continued with television. In 2011, Jaime landed a lead role in the CW series Heart of Dixie, playing Southern belle Lemon Breland. It was a far cry from the edgy, aloof character she once embodied, but it allowed her to show something new: warmth, humor, resilience. For the first time, audiences saw her not as a ghost from fashion's past, but as a woman fully alive in her second act. Off-screen, Jaime began speaking more openly about the trauma she endured. She revealed her past struggles with addiction not as a scandal, but as a human story of survival. She spoke out about the predatory culture of modeling in the 1990s, about losing Davide, about the cost of being made into a symbol. And slowly, the narrative began to shift. She was no longer the fallen muse. She was a survivor, a mother, a voice.
Jaime King never got the kind of closure the fashion industry typically reserves for its muses. No commemorative spreads, no legacy retrospectives, no graceful transition into iconic status. But maybe that's because Jaime King was never meant to fit into the industry's narrow mold of success, or its even narrower definition of redemption. She didn't fade away because she was forgotten. She was erased, written out of a story she helped shape, because it was easier for the industry to condemn her image than confront its own obsession with tragedy and aestheticized suffering. Jaime became the scapegoat for an era that was already collapsing under its contradictions. But while the world was eager to forget, she refused to disappear. Her legacy isn't in the covers she once graced or the catwalks she once ruled. It's in the quiet strength of her return. It's in the choice to rebuild her life in her own image, not the one cast onto her. It's in her refusal to let someone else's overdose become the only story ever told about her. In a time when fashion was infatuated with the illusion of destruction, Jaime King survived it and then chose to evolve. She transformed from a face that was used to sell a fantasy into a voice that speaks truth about what that fantasy cost. And in doing so, she gave others permission to rewrite their own narratives. She is no longer James King, the heroin chic model. She is Jaime King, actress, mother, survivor, and a woman whose fall was never truly hers, but whose rise was undeniably her own. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing a woman can do in an industry built to consume her is to stay standing.